Your brain operates neural networks dedicated to pattern recognition that function continuously, even during sleep. Right now, these systems are finding faces in clouds, predicting the next word in this sentence, and registering that the person across from you just shifted their weight the same way they did before disagreeing yesterday. But in autistic minds, this fundamental cognitive system operates differently. Not broken, not deficient, but calibrated to detect patterns that most brains miss entirely. The result represents a cognitive trade-off that substantially alters how someone experiences their environment. Hey there, Neurospicy folks! I'm Dr. Monty, and I'm an ADHD psychologist with a special interest in all things neurodivergent neuroscience. If you enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel to help me grow and bring more scientific understanding and awareness to a larger audience. Thanks so much! When most people think about autism and pattern recognition, they picture the savant counting toothpicks or the child who can memorize train schedules. These examples have created a misleading framework that autistic pattern recognition is either a specialized skill or doesn't exist at all outside of visual puzzles. The research reveals something far more complex. This misconception runs deep because pattern recognition itself is invisible. When you instantly recognize your friend's laugh in a crowded room, or know that your boss is in a bad mood from the way they typed an email, you're not consciously running pattern detection. It just happens. So when researchers first studied autistic cognition, they looked for the obvious stuff. Can autistic people spot hidden shapes, remember number sequences, or solve visual puzzles? Many could, often better than neurotypical controls. But this narrow focus missed the bigger picture. Pattern recognition in autism isn't just about finding triangles in complex diagrams. It's a fundamental difference in how the brain processes information, what it pays attention to, what it considers signal versus noise, and how it builds models of the world. This difference creates genuine cognitive strengths, but it also creates costs that most discussions of autistic abilities completely ignore. The savant narrative has obscured a more complex reality. Autistic pattern recognition is simultaneously enhanced and constrained, powerful and exhausting, a source of insight and a barrier to social connection. Understanding how this actually works in the brain requires us to abandon the idea that pattern recognition is just one skill among many, and see it instead as a core organizing principle of cognition itself. To understand what's different about autistic pattern recognition, we need to start with what pattern recognition actually is in any brain. Think of your visual system as a hierarchy of pattern detectors, each layer looking for increasingly complex regularities. The bottom layer detects edges and contrasts. The next layer combines edges into shapes. Higher layers recognize objects, then scenes, then meaning. This hierarchy exists throughout the brain, not just in vision. Language has it. Sounds become phonemes, become words, become sentences, become meaning. Social cognition has it too. Facial expressions become emotional states, become intentions, become social predictions. Every domain of human cognition is built on this same architecture. Simple patterns get combined into complex ones, bottom up and top down simultaneously. Laurent Mottron at the University of Montreal has spent decades studying what he proposes as enhanced perceptual functioning in autism. His lab's work, spanning from the late 1990s through today, suggests that autistic brains don't just process patterns differently, they process them with the hierarchy partially inverted. In neurotypical pattern recognition, higher-level expectations strongly influence what lower levels detect. When you're looking for your keys, your brain primes the visual system to enhance key-shaped patterns while suppressing everything else. You literally see differently because of what you expect to find. But according to Mottron's model, autistic brains give much more weight to bottom-up information, what's actually there, and less weight to top-down expectations. A 2020 study by Keane and colleagues at Trinity College Dublin demonstrated this beautifully using something called feature diagnosticity mapping. They showed neurotypical and autistic participants thousands of natural images and tracked which visual features each group relied on for recognition. The neurotypical participants used a mix of high-level Gestalt information, the overall shape and context, along with some details. But participants with higher autistic traits relied significantly more on high-spatial-frequency information, the fine-grained details that most brains treat as noise. This isn't just a visual phenomenon. Michelle Mowery's team at UC Davis found similar patterns in auditory processing. Autistic individuals showed enhanced detection of acoustic patterns that neurotypical listeners couldn't even perceive consciously. They were picking up regularities in sound streams that other brains filtered out as irrelevant. Think of it this way. If neurotypical pattern recognition is like having a smart autocomplete system that fills in what it thinks you want to see, autistic pattern recognition is like having that autocomplete turned way down, forcing conscious attention to information that usually gets processed automatically. This creates a paradox. On one hand, you detect patterns that others miss entirely, subtle regularities in data, inconsistencies in systems, connections across domains that seem unrelated. On the other hand, you're constantly processing information that other brains have learned to ignore, which is cognitively expensive. Bernard Crespi at Simon Fraser University has proposed that this difference explains both the restricted interests and the social challenges in autism through a single mechanism. Autistic brains, he argues, are pattern-seeking systems that gravitate toward domains with high internal structure: mathematics, music, mechanical systems, rule-based games, because these domains reward the kind of detailed, bottom-up analysis that autistic cognition excels at. Social interaction, by contrast, is notoriously low in reliable patterns. The same facial expression can mean different things depending on context, relationship history, cultural background, and dozens of other variables. The same words can be sincere or sarcastic, friendly or threatening. For a brain calibrated to detect reliable patterns, social interaction presents a frustrating paradox. It's clearly patterned. People don't behave randomly. But the patterns are so context-dependent and exception-riddled that they resist the kind of systematic analysis that works everywhere else. This creates what researchers call the social camouflage phenomenon. Many autistic individuals do learn social patterns, but they do it through conscious analysis rather than intuitive absorption. They study facial expressions like a field guide, memorize conversation scripts, and build explicit rules for social behavior. The pattern recognition is still there, it's just running on social data in a way that requires enormous cognitive effort. Here's where the story gets more complex, and where we need to be honest about what we don't fully understand. The enhanced perceptual functioning model explains a lot, but it doesn't explain everything, and it certainly doesn't apply uniformly across all autistic individuals. There's enormous heterogeneity. Recent work by researchers at Stanford looked at pattern separation memory, the ability to distinguish between similar but not identical experiences, in over 120 autistic children. They found not one but 3 distinct cognitive profiles. Some children showed the expected enhanced detail processing. Others showed increased generalization, essentially the opposite pattern. A third group showed mixed profiles that didn't fit either model cleanly. This heterogeneity isn't just measurement noise. It reflects real differences in how autistic brains are organized. Some autistic individuals do show the enhanced bottom-up processing that Mottron describes. Others show different patterns entirely. Some have exceptional visual pattern recognition but struggle with auditory patterns. Others are the reverse. The idea that there's one autistic cognitive style is almost certainly wrong. We're also still grappling with the replication crisis in autism research. Many of the classic findings about autistic cognitive strengths were discovered in small samples, often with significant selection biases toward high-functioning individuals who could complete complex laboratory tasks. When researchers try to replicate these findings in larger, more representative samples, the effects are often smaller and more variable than originally reported. Michelle Dawson, herself an autistic researcher working with Mottron's lab, has been particularly vocal about this issue. She points out that much autism research has been contaminated by deficit-focused assumptions that treat any difference as inherently problematic. But she also warns against the opposite error, assuming that all cognitive differences in autism are strengths or advantages. The reality is more complex. There's also the question of what clinical populations reveal. Autistic individuals with intellectual disabilities, who represent a significant portion of the autism spectrum but are often excluded from cognitive studies, don't always show the same pattern recognition advantages. This raises difficult questions about whether enhanced pattern recognition is a core feature of autism or a characteristic of certain autistic individuals who also happen to have other cognitive strengths. The savant phenomenon adds another layer of complexity. True savant abilities, the calendar calculation, the perfect pitch, the photographic memory, occur in less than 10% of autistic individuals, and they can occur in non-autistic individuals with other developmental differences. Daryl Treffert's decades of research suggests that savant abilities might represent an extreme version of the pattern recognition differences we see more broadly in autism, but they might also be something qualitatively different. Finally, there's the question of developmental change. Most pattern recognition research in autism focuses on children and adolescents, but we know that autistic cognition continues to develop throughout adulthood. Some autistic adults report that their pattern recognition abilities have become more flexible over time, while others describe them as becoming more rigid. We genuinely don't know how these cognitive differences unfold across the lifespan. So what does this mean for how you understand autistic cognition, whether in yourself or others? The key insight is that pattern recognition in autism isn't simply better or worse. It's differently calibrated, with genuine trade-offs that affect daily life in profound ways. If you're autistic, understanding your own pattern recognition style can be transformative. Many autistic adults describe a revelation when they realize that their brain is constantly detecting patterns that others miss, and that this isn't a bug, it's a feature with both costs and benefits. You might notice that you're exhausted after social interactions, not because you're bad at them, but because you're doing conscious pattern analysis work that others do automatically. You might realize that your intense interests aren't random obsessions, but reflect your brain's natural gravitational pull toward domains with rich, analyzable structure. This understanding can inform practical decisions about careers, relationships, and daily life management. Fields that reward systematic pattern detection, data analysis, software engineering, scientific research, quality control, music, visual arts, often provide environments where autistic cognition can flourish without the constant cognitive overhead of social pattern translation. This doesn't mean autistic individuals can't succeed in social fields, but it does mean recognizing when you're working with versus against your natural cognitive grain. For non-autistic individuals, this research should fundamentally change how you think about autistic colleagues, friends, or family members. When an autistic person points out inconsistencies that seem trivial to you, or becomes frustrated by exceptions to rules that seem obviously flexible, they're not being pedantic. They're responding to pattern violations that their brain registers as genuinely significant. When they struggle with social situations that seem straightforward to you, they're not lacking empathy or social motivation. They're trying to do conscious analysis of patterns that your brain processes automatically. This has implications for education and workplace accommodations. Traditional approaches often focus on teaching autistic individuals to suppress their natural pattern recognition style and adopt neurotypical social strategies. But the research suggests a different approach, designing environments that leverage autistic pattern recognition strengths while providing explicit structure for domains where implicit social patterns create barriers. The heterogeneity research points towards something even more important, the need for individualized approaches. Since autistic pattern recognition comes in multiple varieties, one-size-fits-all interventions are likely to fail. Some autistic individuals might benefit from training in pattern generalization, others from training in detail focus, still others from mixed approaches that match their specific cognitive profile. Perhaps most importantly, this research suggests we need to abandon the idea that autistic cognition is simply a collection of deficits with some compensatory strengths bolted on. Instead, autistic pattern recognition appears to be a coherent cognitive style, different, not broken, with its own internal logic and adaptive advantages in certain contexts. Your brain's pattern recognition system shapes everything from how you recognize faces, to how you navigate conversations, to how you make sense of complex information. In autistic minds, this system is tuned differently, often detecting regularities that others miss while struggling with the noisy, context-dependent patterns that dominate social life. This isn't a simple story of cognitive superpowers or deficits, but something more complex, a fundamental trade-off in how brains can be organized, with real costs and real benefits that vary enormously between individuals. Understanding autism means understanding that there are multiple ways to be intelligent, multiple ways to process patterns, and multiple ways to make sense of a complex world. The autistic version isn't better or worse than the neurotypical version. It's different, and that difference reveals something important about the flexibility and diversity of human cognition itself.